So Darkwing Duck, which you were talking about, was one of my favorites when I was a kid, and I
Well,
introduced.
that's really cool because I like Big Honker Muddlefoot because he's a good guy.
Hi, Honker.
Hello. Hello.
So, how did you get the role of Honker? Was that like an audition?
Yep, I had to audition for that too, but the director knew me and she kind of had something in mind. So when I came in, she said, "Do that little boy voice that you do." And I said, "Okay." And they liked it. Ta-da!
Mm. My earliest memory of Darkwing Duck came from I had a VHS tape, and I still probably have it here because I have a VCR TV to watch all these old things on. But I had a tape that came with two Disney afternoon TV episodes that were Christmas related. One was Goof Troop, and it was the
Yeah.
Goof Troop. It was the Goof Troop holiday special, and then after that was the Darkwing Duck holiday special, and I think Honker played a big role in that because
Darkwing Duck had a holiday special?
yeah, and actually, I think Honker played a big role in it because Bushroot, you know which character I mean by Bushroot, right?
Yep, Tino.
Yeah, he had basically had like these robotic Christmas trees that were taking gifts from everyone and even stole
Right,
Honker's
right.
gifts.
Yeah, oh gosh, yes. Okay. Yeah. It's probably on the series. I have this series on DVD. I don't know if it was it really a special or just a Christmas related episode.
I I call it a special, but it was a Christmas related episode.
Yeah, because before you were born, we used to do a lot of things called after school specials, Saturday afternoon specials. So there were episodes that people made that were specials,
Mm.
separate from the series.
So do you have any favorite episodes or memories from Darkwing Duck besides the holiday episode?
Besides, I think the first one, just the first one I was in, because it's just so great. It was so great working with the woman who played Gosalyn's voice. She was such a joy to watch and listen to.
Mm.
And we were working with Jim again, and he's so amazing. I mean, I really just like being in the audience of my own shows, just watching my fellow actors work. And Jim not only played Darkwing, but he played Herb Muddlefoot
Right.
too, Honker's
I
dad.
I have a neighbor who I always thought looked like Herb Muddlefoot a little
Oh,
bit.
how funny. And because we got a lot of guest stars. So, we had all kinds of people come in and play bad guys, and that was fun just working with all the great talent.
Nice.
That's my favorite part of anything.
Mm. There was one episode featuring Honker that I remember where Honker, I think he was accused of stealing a painting, which was, I
In the
believe,
art, yeah. Uh-huh.
yes, yeah.
There is another podcast I was a guest on, and it's the Darkwing Duck podcast.
Oh, really?
And Will Santana's show, and they just watch every episode and do really good commentary. So they asked me to be a guest on that one. And I'm trying to think what the name of the episode is. But yeah, that was a great episode. I enjoyed watching it.
I remember I had bought a VHS tape that contained that episode, and I was in an art class in high school at the time, and we were doing Salvador Dali inspired work, I think. And I remember having dinner that night
I'm
and
like,
watching.
oh, I know what this is.
Yeah, and I remember seeing the persistence of memory. So I emailed my art teacher, Miss Allie, and I said to her, "This is from a show called Darkwing Duck. I think you'll notice some artwork that you've been showing us." And the next day, she said to me, "I used to watch that show."
Yeah, yeah.
That one has the clearest origin. I mean, as far as the project is, because Jeffrey ordered me to do it. He said, Jeffrey Katzenberg. Again, remember what I said, that they liked intriguing names or joke names.
Right.
Well, DuckTales had done an episode called Double O Duck, and he thought that was a great title. And he said, "I want you to do a show called Double O Duck." In the episode, it was Launchpad. His orders were to do Double O Duck. It can't be Launchpad. He said, "I want you to create a new character." That was what I was ordered to do. There's another Duck episode, which to this day don't think I've seen, and it's the Midnight Mallard or the Masked Mallard, and it was basically Scrooge McDuck put on a superhero suit for whatever reason. So he was not based on that. Launchpad was never at the start of the show. He was in some of the development as a part of a group. Anyway, I went in and took a shot at Double O Duck, and I was not excited about it because it just seemed like it's going to be a James Bond spoof, and this is before you know we'd seen Austin Powers basically had show how you can do that and do an insane way. Anyway, I did a by the numbers kind of thing, and it didn't really have that Disney heart you expect. And Jeffrey looked at it and said, "Doesn't have the Disney heart. It doesn't have anything to it. It's just a parody." So he agreed with me. And now I realize how lucky I was, because normally when somebody strikes out on a pitch like that, they give it to somebody else. And instead, he said, "Do it over." So I went in. We had a bunch of story editors and people I wanted to work with or had worked with on staff. Instead of being signed on to do a show, which generally they are now, Disney would hire you for a certain term of however many years, or with an option for more. And the beautiful thing about that is you could be called in to help out on any show, just and I could bring in the guys I wanted to work with on the show if I could sell it. And it was Dwayne Capizzi, who had done the animated Alf show and Jackie Chan Adventures and Men in Black. Anyway, Dwayne was there always. He looked at the early drawings of Double O Duck, which was basically a Donald in a white tuxedo and a mask and a small hat and a cape. And he said, really, looking at this guy, he looks more like a pulp hero, like the Shadow or the Green Hornet. And that was the light bulb over my head, where I knew about that stuff. I was too young to have listened to it on the radio, but because my comic fandom overlapped with my science fiction fandom and basically old radio fandom, I knew about the Shadow and Green Hornet and all that. And that really opened me up more toward certainly leaning heavily toward the superhero, Anyway, the show didn't sell till we added Gosalyn to it. As Frank Angonis, who did the new version of DuckTales, said, in my first time I met him, we instantly started talking about Darkwing, because that's the show he really wanted to do. Mm-hmm. He said, "Oh, Tad, we know Darkwing is the story of a father and a daughter and a launch pad." And anyway, Gosalyn was so important to that. And, that's what sold the show, basically. That added the Disney heart, the idea that, later we said, what if Batman had a little girl who refused to stay at home? That was, going on that. Gosalyn was basically an animated Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. So that sold the show. We went out and sold it. We made pins and posters and all that. And when I say sold it, it was in syndication. So you sold it to stations all across the country. Right. And got a letter from a guy called Cubby Broccoli, who was the famous producer of all the James Bond films. He said, "We own Double O. It's not a thing. It was created by Ian Fleming, and you can't use it." There had been all sorts of parodies out there. Obviously, DuckTales did one. But the idea that this would be a big deal, because DuckTales was a huge hit, and it would, I don't know if they were worried about tarnishing the name or whatever, they just basically said, "You can't do it." So we had come up with a new name, and we had a contest, and ultimately the contest was won by Alan Burnett, who then went on to do, work with Bruce Timm on the first animated Batman. I mean, the first really good one, anyway.
Besides the Lego one, yeah.
Well, this predates that. Alan basically pitched the name Darkwing, and I immediately loved it. And we had people submitting pages and pages of names, and it wasn't even close. There was not a second runner-up. You just had Darkwing, and I said, but we have to add Duck to it, because Darkwing, that kind of adventure name, is what he thinks he is, but Darkwing Duck adds the silly part, which is part of the comedy. Because back then this is before Aladdin. So there were discussions of, you know, from executives saying, what do you mean he's going to look at the camera or, you know, do that kind of, if, you know, they actually, one executive said, look, if you can drop a safe on him and he survives, how do you have any jeopardy in the show? You know, like, how do you cut to a commercial and want to get the audience to come back? And I said, well, when he's in real danger, we play scary music and he acts scared. And that's, it worked. We actually had, you know, the characters would get in trouble. You worried about Gosalyn and all of that. It all worked. And, you know, and it was still goofy and, you know, people were entertained. That was the main thing. And I've always said the difference between Darkwing and DuckTales is in the DuckTales universe, you drop a safe on Scrooge, you end up with a mess on the sidewalk. If you drop it on Darkwing, you know, the door is going to swing open of the safe and he's going to walk out like an accordion. You know, that was just the difference in how we treated things.
Yeah.
That was cool. I mean, again, my two highlights of my career were Darkwing Duck and the animated Hellboy movies.
Gosalyn, you know, she's the kind of person that always wants to tag along, but I always thought she was more so a troublemaker.
Well, she is. I mean, it is her nature to get into trouble. So
Yeah.
it's just that she was, you know, and she was always in over her head. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to tag along and do a great job. I mean, it does show you what, you know, everybody accepted Batman and Robin. Robin was like was supposed to be 9 years old. It's like, I'm going to be fighting the most ruthless criminals, these murderous scum. You know what I need is a 9-year-old kid. You know, none of that makes sense, but it was a conceit that started back in the golden age of comics, and just people accepted it because they wanted kids to, you know, watch it, you know, to pick up the magazines. And there wasn't really continuity that came in with Marvel when they started. So you were constantly resetting, you know, the thing. So we took a lot of liberties with Darkwing, and I just chased what I thought was the most entertainment. And in fact, Darkwing is famous for doing, I am the bubble gum that sticks to the bottom of your shoes and that sort of thing.
I am the little mouse
well,
that eats your cheese.
Exactly. And he never used to do that. Now, early on, he didn't. He had one thing he said, I am the shadow that flaps in the night. I am the something that pecks at your nightmares. And luckily, it was just like the third script. It was a show where, by contrivance, Launchpad had to pretend to be Darkwing Duck, and Launchpad could never get the line right, so he would screw up, and he said, "I am the road salt that rots the underside of your car." We thought it was hilarious, and I said, that's too hilarious not to use. And we went back and rewrote. I had all the editors rewrite their any script that was, you know, done to include that gag, because it was like, no, we can't make it a one-time Launchpad thing. That's Darkwing always did it, and it's one of the things he's most famous for. Likewise, or similarly anyway, we did an episode where Ray that Megavolt creates splits Darkwing into a good half and a bad half. And at the end of that episode, both played by Jim Cummings brilliantly. At the end of the episode, I love Negaduck. I'm telling you all, go ahead, use Negaduck again. And at first they said, but it's the same story if we're constantly splitting them. I said, no, I don't split them. You know, we'd have Posiduck. And I said, no, nobody likes Posiduck. You like Negaduck. And they said, here's how I ran the show. They said, how do we explain that Negaduck comes back? And I said, you don't. You just go ahead and do it. And that's how I ran the show. And that's where we had some of the brilliant stuff, because we didn't worry about the little things, you know. Now, years later, after decades of Marvel and then DC continuity and all shows on TV suddenly having arcs to every season, and the animation arcs too, you know, fans cobble together their own version of continuity, which is fine. I think that adds a layer of entertainment, you know, that I never planned for. But when they talk about the origin of Darkwing, I purposely gave I never gave him the straight origin. He had like 6 origins in the show or more. Fans point to the one where he went to high school with Megavolt, and they say, well, that's canon. That's how he did it. I said, no, it's just the one you like the most. It's completely different from this origin over here, where Darkwing inspired his past self when they were fighting a rock and roll criminal. So, I mean, again, it was a different thing. In the new DuckTales, they were much more continuity oriented. And when they introduced Darkwing there, I thought they did a brilliant job of setting up a series that they never got to do.
Well, we were all lined up, and none of us really read for the roles. They just called us in. They just knew who we were and said, okay, Mike, you're reading Crackerjack, and I think Dan Castaneda, you're doing this character, and you're doing that. And we just sort of looked at a drawing and tried to come up with something. And I had something in my head that I wanted to do. And I looked at it, I said, oh yeah, I want to do this kind of, this kind of sound over here. And then Dan, whose character spoke before mine, did that voice.
Is that for Megavolt?
Yeah. And I thought, which is sort of a hyper Kirk Douglas, the actor. Kirk Douglas always spoke with a crack in his voice. So he wound up doing that. I thought, where am I going to go with this? My line is coming up in another half of the page, and I hadn't come up with the character because I was going to do that. Because we all sort of like know things we want to do that we can call upon. So I wound up doing just this hysterical, oh, that kind of thing. That would be fun because he's sort of nutty, and Mr. Banana, whatever, and they bought it. They said, yeah, that's good. We like that. I said, okay, good, great. That's how Crackerjack came about.